On April 12th, 2013, I was called to an emergency dive. Although I usually worked in forensics or rescue operations, this assignment was completely different. Usually, calls involve urgent situations where there is a danger to life or an object that needs to be found urgently. But this time, the purpose was mysterious. When I got the call in the middle of the night, I immediately felt that something serious had happened. I was told about a geological event that was supposedly recordable. No one explained the details, and all my questions were answered only with a vague, "I don't know." I knew most of the specialists in this field throughout the state, but the people I met were strangers to me. They seemed to be working in the shadows, without any identification. We were brought to Greenbrier Valley in West Virginia, a remote area where government vehicles raced. Among them, I recognized representatives from agencies such as the USACE, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, NOAA, EPA, and USGS. But many of the vehicles were unmarked, and some even had clearly fabricated logos. A tense crowd literally surrounded me. People were shouting at each other, arguing. One of the men, his face red with anger, was almost crying, trying to make a point to the young woman who was just nodding and smiling. Gradually, questions began to flood me. Did you take your equipment? Where is your entrance? A few familiar faces appeared in the crowd. Garrett and Nora, that we had worked together on rescue operations before. But this was a completely different mission. As they led us to the site, I saw a dried-up lake with only dirt and a puddle in the middle left. Seagulls were screaming loudly, catching the dying fish, and people in protective suits were trying in vain to drive them away. In the center of the lake was a pit about 6 feet by 4 feet, surrounded by tables, safety tape, and red flags. We were warned to dive in and keep reporting anything we saw. But Garrett tried to deny that there was an emergency. He was interrupted by a woman who literally pushed him into the mud, screaming that he had to do it or his career would be ruined. We had no dive plan, no clear understanding of the temperature, or any other important data. Only chaos and pressure surrounded us as we braced ourselves for the unknown that lurked in the murky water. Here's an updated excerpt without time codes. With a heightened sense of dread and tension, the earth seemed to freeze in anticipation as we plunged into the newly formed cave. The cold was bone-chilling, even through our thick wetsuits, and the water, like a mirror, reflected something invisible, something evil. This place, Nora muttered, her voice trembling, not from the cold, but from a deep, unspeakable fear. A gaping void opened up before us, vast, dark, and silent. "Damn, it doesn't even look like Earth," Garrett whispered. Our movements were methodical, but tense. I could see Nora's hands trembling slightly as she fastened the straps of the cylinders. The rules were simple. No risks, just strict protocol. But the silence that reigned all around seemed to whisper that we were doing something terribly wrong. Samples of everything, the technicians said on the surface, their voices muffled, as if coming through a layer of water. The land we were exploring could have been isolated for tens of thousands of years, maybe hundreds of thousands, and it was this isolation that caused the greatest fear. The first seconds underwater were the worst. The murky water absorbed the light of our flashlights, creating the illusion of endless darkness. Mud particles swirled around us like shadows that made their way under the skin. Anxiety squeezed our chests like an iron vise. When we reached the bottom, we saw the cave wall. It was rough, covered with a thin layer of crystals. Is this salt? I thought, but its shimmer was wrong. It seemed to slide under the skin, leaving a cold sensation behind it. Nora took the sample silently, the voices of our leaders on the surface buzzing in her ears, increasingly distant and indistinct. "Go deeper," came the command. The tunnel was cramped. The walls seemed almost to breathe beside us. They were rough and sharp, giving the impression that at any moment they might close in, swallowing us in a maw of stone. When we reached the limit of our air hoses, we stopped. Nora pressed the call button. "Control, we need longer lines." Silence in response. She repeated the request, but the link was silent. And that's when we heard it. A deep, tearing sound from the darkness. It wasn't the movement of stone. It was something else. Living. We moved forward, but each step we took seemed futile. The water remained as black as ever, and the space around us was as threatening as ever. It seemed that we were walking in an endless loop where time itself had stopped. But suddenly Garrett froze in place. His eyes were fixed on something in the water. I looked there, something barely noticeable shimmering in the dim light of our flashlights. Small fish-like creatures with blue bodies, no eyes, but with ugly beaks that looked like octopus jaws, were darting past. They were strange, alien, almost otherworldly. They darted away with incredible speed, as if something was telling them to stay as far away from us as possible. We didn't even try to touch them. We intuitively understood that it could be dangerous. Moving on, we unexpectedly bumped into the stone ceiling. No exit, no sign of a tunnel. Panic was already starting to creep in. We looked at each other in silent despair. The water, so dark and viscous, seemed to be trying to swallow us up. Garrett took out his chisel and began to hammer at the rock, searching for some clue. A few pieces of debris sank down and began to drift to the side. The current, it was a sense of hope, but with it a new fear. What if it led to an even bigger trap? When we finally found the narrow passage, it was hard not to panic. The place was so narrow that we had a gasp to squeeze through. The rocks pressed in on us from all sides, and the fear that the passage might collapse was overwhelming. Every inch seemed an eternity. Finally, we broke through to the air pocket. The atmosphere in this place was oppressive. The air was thick and musty, with a sweet, almost repulsive aftertaste. We tried to calm our breathing, but it was difficult. The shadow of fear crept deeper and deeper, forcing our movements to be not so much cautious as convulsive. This place, Garrett stopped mid-sentence, trying to control himself, but there was undisguised terror in his voice. Another tunnel stretched ahead, but we still stood, as if it could protect us from the unknown. The darkness behind us reminded us of itself with cold touches, and time began to play against us again. Something invisible was urging us, forcing us to move, as if stopping could cost us our lives. Blows. Blood in my mouth. Feelings of pain pierced me, but there was no time to stop. I took a deep breath to somehow calm myself, but with each cough, I only got worse. I was trapped. I had no choice. I had to move forward. The mask pressed against my face, but somehow it calmed my fear. My breathing was heavy, anxious, but I forced myself to move. Around me was impenetrable darkness. I began to move carefully, catching every micro noise, every sound. The water felt new, its power, its cold, as if it itself was part of this horror that surrounded me. And now, I found myself in a narrow branch of the tunnel, where the air was even more suffocating. I stopped to decide which way to choose, but intuition told me to move upwards. The current became stronger, as if someone invisible was pulling me further into the darkness. The feeling became irresistible, as if something was watching me, hiding in the water itself. I heard the sounds again, the clank of metal. Only a few minutes, and I found it, Garrett's tank. It should have been a relief, but something inside me froze. All my attempts to remain calm were in vain. I could feel my pulse quickening, and the air in my scuba tank was gradually running out. Each new breath hold became even more alarming. All I could do was move forward and search for air. And now, I found myself in another dark air pocket, but the sounds became more and more unbearable. The fish that rushed past, they seemed to sense something. They fled as if they knew that something was following them that should not exist in this world. But I could not leave them behind me. I tried to move on, each step feeling heavy, unnatural. The water seemed heavier with each second. It wrapped around me like hands reaching out from the darkness, trying to stop me. I could not turn back. Garrett's tank still had some air left, but soon it would be gone. My breath became short. I felt dizzy. My foot slipped on the slippery bottom and sank into the water. Now there was neither time nor energy to think. I moved blindly, understanding that each next step could be the last. And then I heard it. It was a quiet, disgusting sucking, as if a huge creature was swallowing everything in its path. I pressed myself against the wall, try not to give myself away. My heart was beating so hard that it seemed that even someone hiding in the darkness would hear it. Suddenly, I heard a crunch, something gnawing, and it was closer than I could have imagined. I stood frozen, fear squeezing my throat. But then everything fell silent. And in this silence, I realized that I had a chance. My step became cautious, but I felt how every sound, every movement could give me away. The water tickled my skin, and I felt something below me hear me, watch me. But I walked, hiding in the shadows. Now everything became a matter of every breath, every movement. I felt how with each new